Hi, this is Steve with OS Nexus, and in this video we're going to go through the process of setting up S3 object storage. I've got a 3-node QuantaStor Grid running QuantaStor 5, and the process that we're going to go through is all right within the UI. If you choose the Getting Started dialog button in the ribbon bar and then choose the Scale Out S3 pool setup, these 6 steps are what we're going to go through. Now I can just click the buttons and it'll bring us up those various dialogues, and we can kind of drive everything right from the Getting Started page. But to get you a little more familiar with the QuantaStor UI, I'm actually going to do all of these steps right through the regular ribbon bar buttons that you see in the UI. So the first stage of setting up a scale out object storage cluster is to choose the Create Cluster button in the upper left-hand corner. You can name the cluster whatever you like. If you want to use encryption, now's the time to go check that box, and then it'll apply encryption to all the disk devices and journal devices that we add to the cluster later on. We want to add these specific boxes to this new cluster. If you have many systems in your QuantaStor grid, then you could set up multiple clusters. These clusters could potentially span multiple sites. In this case, I have 3 servers that are all in the same rack. So it's a very simple configuration. And it has selected automatically the correct client interface and backend interface that we'll be using for this configuration today. So I'm just going to go click OK, and it's going to go set up the cluster for us. QuantaStor Grid technology makes it so that you can log into any of the systems in a given grid and manage your clusters and your storage environment from anywhere. I've logged into the first system. I'm logged into 42-27, but I could just as easily log into the other 2 servers in my grid, 42-29 and 31, and be seeing the same play-by-play of the operations that are happening in the taskbar, and be able to manage it from all the nodes simultaneously. So this first operation of creating the scale out storage cluster is currently running, and it's setting up what are called the monitors. The monitors are sort of the watchdogs for the cluster. They're keeping track of the OSDs and which OSDs are online and offline. So if a node goes offline, the monitors form a quorum and are able to communicate to the clients which OSDs are on or off, so that they're able to continually read and write data without interruption. You can see here the first monitor is already in the process of being set up. We can go and see that status here in the Cluster Monitors tab. It takes a minute or 2 for the monitors to get set up, and QuantaStor always sets up 3 monitors by default. After those 3 monitors have been set up, you can add additional monitors by just clicking Add Monitor. So if we were setting up, say, a 20-node cluster here, the monitors would be set up on the first 3 systems, and then I could go and add 2 additional monitors after that, or I could remove these and set up monitors on different boxes. So these buttons here for Add Remove Monitor is how you would go and add and remove monitors from a cluster. You can see now they are in the initializing state. We want this to transition to the normal state before we go to the next step, which is to go and add storage devices to the cluster. So I'm going to take a minute here and let this finish setting up. You can see the task is still running. You can see the progress of the task is at 85%. Now it's at 90. And so you can see everything that's happening within the storage grid in real time. Now it's completed, so the monitors are all set up. It takes sometimes a minute or 2 for the status of the monitors to update here in the UI. So we're just going to go and leave that and go ahead and start the next stage, which is setting up all the storage devices. So to do that, we clicked on that button that says Multi-Create, and this is going to allow us to go and choose both SSD devices that we want to use as our write journals. These are going to go and accelerate our write performance. And these are mandatory. With QuantaStor, you have to select at least 1 SSD device as your journal per server. And so I'm going to sort here by the device name so that all of our NVMe devices here appear at the top. And then I'm going to choose a couple of these devices for each server. So actually, for this example, I'm just going to choose 1 NVMe device from each server. So I've selected one for the 4227, I've selected one for the 4229, and I'm going to choose one more NVMe device for the 4231. And we're going to go add those. And now we want to show just all of the devices that are coming from the controller that are just passed through hard disk drives. All of these devices have MR9 in their name, so I can just type MR9 and filter on those, and that'll get rid of all of the SSD drives from the list. So now I could just technically just select everything and put all of these devices into the data device list. So, and now it's going to go, when we click OK, it's going to go and create slices out of these journals so that we can go and set up many hard drives with a piece of the SSD to be used as its write journal. The way that you size these is that for every hard drive, you want about 100 megabytes per second of throughput on your journal device. So if you have an NVMe journal that can do 2 gigabytes per second, that journal will be fast enough to supply the necessary write performance boost to about 20 hard drives. I've got a few NVMe devices selected here for the journal, and the rest are data drives. We're all set to go. I'm just going to click OK, and it's going to go set everything up for us. So the first stage of this, of course, is to go make the journal slices, because as we create OSDs, we need to give them a piece of the journal to go and accelerate it. So the stage that it starts off with is really setting up all the wall devices. And so this is going to take a few minutes. I'm going to basically pause the video and then come back. And at that point, the journal devices will have been created and the OSDs will be created. QuantaStor does a coordinated task to go and set this up across all of the different nodes. You can see that there's multiple tasks running at this stage. Here, if I clear out the completed tasks, we'll be able to see in more detail what's currently running. So we're currently at this stage of setting up the journal devices, and there's a subtask running here to go set up those journals. Now you can see it's parallelizing that journal setup activity. We've got running jobs on system 27 and 29. When those are done, it'll start the stage of setting up all of the OSDs. So if you have, whether it's a 3-node storage cluster that we're setting up here, or a 20 or 50 node storage cluster, it's going to take roughly the same amount of time because QuantaStor is parallelizing this work across several nodes. But it does take several minutes, typically around 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the number of devices. I didn't select that many disks for this particular cluster, so this is probably going to take only about 5 minutes. So I'll be pausing and coming back. Okay, now all our OSDs are set up. That took a few minutes. You'll see inside the UI all of the OSDs that have been created, and you can see they're all in the normal exists up stage. It takes a couple minutes for them to transition from the initializing state to the normal exists up, so you can just want to wait for them to transition and then go on to the next step. You can see here all the various subtasks have all been completed. And so we can just clear the tasks out and clean the slate for the next step. So the next step is to go create the pools of storage that we're going to form the S3 zone out of. And in fact, we're going to do that in a single step. You just say create the S3 zone and it creates everything for you. A little bit about this. We're going to just use the defaults there. We only have one Ceph cluster, so we're going to pick that one. If we had multiple Ceph clusters, we could just create the zone in any of the available clusters in the storage grid. Down at the bottom is where you choose the pool layout, and there's some choices here. You can choose erasure coding. You can use replica 2, which is 2 copies of the data, and replica 3, which would be 3 copies of the data. We're going to choose erasure coding. That's especially a good choice for object storage because it's going to give you a more efficient use of your storage. The default is 2+1, so when you're choosing default, what you're really getting is this K2 M1 erasure, but you can choose any of these different erasure coding levels. And if the one that you're looking for is not in the list, you can go and add additional erasure coding levels by using this create pool profile at the upper left-hand corner. I'm going to just use the erasure coding default setting, which is the 2K plus 1M. That gives us effectively similar to like a single parity, like a RAID 5 for those that are familiar with RAID technology. It's using the same kind of Reed-Solomon technology that is used in RAID. But in this case, the data is being distributed across all of the different servers, and it allows us to then add additional servers dynamically and expand and scale out the storage environment. So now that we've chosen our pool layout, which is just the defaults in this case, we're going to click OK, and it's going to go set up that object storage zone so that we can start using the S3 protocol to write data into our storage cluster. This is going to take a couple of minutes, so I'm going to pause the video while it goes and sets up these object storage pools, and then we'll resume again. About 3 minutes have passed at this point, and all of the object storage is set up. You can see that the task is now completed, and what you'll see is this default zone that we've created, and you'll also see this Rados Gateway root pool. So that's what you should see after you've gone and set up the zone. At this stage, we're ready to go and set up a S3 gateway. So we're going to choose that here to go and add an S3 gateway. We want all of our users to log into the storage using the S3 protocol on the 10.1 network. So we're going to put an S3 gateway on each of these ports. I'm just going to add one gateway for this example here, but to just add them to the other systems, you just click here, add gateway, and then choose the next system and so on, and just put them all onto the same network so you can go and load balance it. Here, we'll go ahead and add it to another system as well. It doesn't take very long for that to finish. So at this point, you can see those. If we go back to this tab, there's the first one that we set up, and there's the second one to go put a gateway onto the third network, onto the third server. Again, we'll just go ahead and do that. 31, and we want the 10.1 network, and it's going to go and add that for us. So at this point, what we've done is we've set up the Ceph cluster, we've added the storage to the Ceph cluster, and we've created the pool to store the data in, and we used erasure coding, an erasure coding profile with 2 data, 1 parity, so it's going to be about 66% efficient. And then we enabled the gateway services so that we're able to go and log in and create buckets and do the management operations. So the next step is to go and add a user. I'm going to go ahead and create a user. We'll just call it user 1. And we can go and set up quotas for this user by adjusting those at the bottom. You can have it auto-generate an access and secret key, or you can go and input specific secret and access keys for the buckets, or for the user access to that user's buckets that way. I'm going to put in the display name for the user, and Steve. You can put it in email address as well, and just click OK, and that's going to go create that user account. So there's our user 1. Now that we have a user, we can go and start creating buckets and assigning them to that user. I'm just going to choose that user from the list, and we're just going to call this bucket 1. And there's various permissions choices if you are creating a bucket that you want to be publicly readable. Maybe you've got a content delivery network where you want to go and make it publicly available. If it's maybe backup, then you'd set it to private, or authorized read, where you're giving access to read access to just users that you have within the cluster. So at any rate, I'm just going to set this one as a private bucket, and that's going to go and set that up for us. So the bucket's been created. You can see that task completed pretty quickly, and we can just create more buckets and add more users at this stage. This bucket is accessible using S3 browser or S3 APIs. So you can use any sort of S3 compatible interface to go and upload storage to that bucket. You can add more users here, and if it's a multi-tenant environment, you can go to the multi-tenancy tab and add a resource group, which will let you take advantage of some of the multi-tenant features so that you can group users under multiple separate tenancies within the same object storage environment. The last thing I wanted to chat about was when we go and set up our scale out cluster, now that we have pools, you can see the overall health. So when you are checking on the overall health of the cluster, this bar here is going to tell you most of what you need to know. When it says normal 100%, it means that all of the object storage devices, they're all in good health. If there is a problem, you'll be able to see the number of placement groups that have some sort of health problem, maybe a drive had failed that needs replacement or it's rebalancing. It would tell us all of that. Right here we know all 28 of the drives that we've added are all in good health. And then this here tells us the total free capacity, the amount of free storage in the cluster that we've set up. If there's a problem with an OSD, if there's a problem with any of these drives, QuantaStor detects that and then generates an alert. So you'd see an alert in this section, and then it will call home to you or OS Nexus, depending on how you have things set up. It'll call home via email. You can also have it call home via PagerDuty and other cloud-based communication mechanisms, like communicating the alerts into a Slack channel, and you can have all of these different mechanisms set up at the same time. The other thing that it does is when you have an OSD that goes bad, you can go to this controllers and enclosures section. It's going to have activated the hard drive LED beacon on the drive. So these this hardware that I have set up, there's a number of disk drives in here. This is a bunch of small form factor drives in this system. So if one of these drives goes bad, if an OSD goes bad, what we're going to see is that this color is going to change from green to red. You can also just manually right click on it and just click identify. That will go and activate the LED beacon on it. So if you're looking to replace a drive or identify a drive in the chassis, you can do that. Here you can also see that we have modified the name of the enclosure. This is an alternate name that you can put to indicate which rack the system is in. Maybe it's in rack 1 at position 20 in the rack. In this case, actually, this is 4227, so that tells me this is actually rack 42, and it's at U27 in the rack. So I can just put that notation on there, and then we'll see that nice label. The disk drives can also be labeled, and all of this correlates back to the OSDs internally within the grid, so that it just makes it a lot easier to go maintain the environment. That's all there is to setting up object storage. We've got the cluster created. We went and added our storage devices, then set up the S3 gateways. The pool was set up, and then we created our buckets. And that's all that there is to it. Remember the Getting Started button in the upper right-hand corner. All the steps that we did are in order right here, step 1 through 6. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at support@osnexus.com. Thanks for watching.